everyone, welcome to another episode of Breaking Into Software. It's your host, Sarah Hudson. Today's podcast is another interview. I love to invite people onto the show so that we can learn from them. My guests all have varying backgrounds. They include full-time software engineers, recruiters, and interns from top tech companies, to random topic experts and much more. Their backgrounds also vary, from conventional engineers to some of the most diverse people you can think of. But they all have one thing in common. I chose them because I think they can offer us all valuable insight through advice or personal stories about what it takes professionally, mentally, and physically to break into software. I hope you enjoy this episode.
I'm very excited to be here.
Just for our audience, I guess there's a lag. We're in the middle of the winter storm blowing through Oklahoma, which is where I'm recording from, so that might be why. Okay, if you want to just start off by giving the audience like your background, how you got into tech, what you currently do, how you got here.
Yeah, sure. So how did I get into tech? In high school, I was on this team called Science Olympiad where we had to build a Rube Goldberg-like machine, which mostly consisted of me and a couple friends like catching things on fire. I really remember going to competition and everything was on fire and we're just like, oh, it's supposed to do that. It was just really fun times. I was like, oh, this is what engineering is, like building things with my friends. I want to do that. So that is how I got into tech. And I also have to thank my dad. In high school, I was like a music art nerd. And then at one point my dad was like, hey, why don't you try a programming elective? I think you'd like it. I didn't really know what that meant, but I had to do that instead of orchestra and I did like it. So I just kind of getting some encouragement along the way eventually led me to tech, I suppose.
Awesome. So the reason I asked you specifically to come on the show was I saw that you are sort of like a salary negotiation expert. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's always good when someone else calls you the expert. I do a lot of coaching and mentoring for folks who are in their career in general, but often as candidates, it's such a stressful time. And since I've been a manager for a number of years, I can see, we often on the other side of the table, we don't know what's going on, like what our managers or our recruiters or interviewers are thinking. And so, yeah, I like to work with people and help them peek behind the curtain so they can shine a nicer light on whatever they're trying to communicate. And then it definitely for negotiation, I mean, that's a whole process that very few of us really understand how companies are making these decisions. So it's a lot easier to help other people, with that kind of confidence and what they should say. It's very difficult to negotiate ourselves, I would say. Even for myself, I find it quite difficult. I have to be my own voice in my head.
Yeah, I totally agree. I speak to a lot of people my age who are going into software for the first time, either through an internship or they're graduating and going to be a full-time employee. And a lot of the time I'll get questions like, is it even okay to ask for a raise? Or this number isn't what I expected it to be. How bad is it for me to maybe try to get it a little higher? And I think there's a big misconception that you could lose your offer if you try to negotiate at all, which I don't think is true, right?
Well, there's always some risk. I mean, there's such a broad spectrum of situations out there and companies. So I would say there's always some risk, but if you go about it in a polite way, you can often strengthen your relationship rather than pushing things apart. It's often, there's sort of two competing things when you're negotiating, is that one, or when you're a candidate in general, is that one, you're trying to tell this other company, this other person, you're my number one pick. I really want to work here. I'm so excited. Like, let's move forward. I'm not wasting your time, because that's a big thing that recruiters are thinking about. Should I spend time on this person? How interested are they? So you're trying to tell them, you're my number one pick and let's make this work. And then on the other hand, you're trying to say, you're trying to ask questions of, well, what if we did this? Or what if we, you try to sort of give some positive options out there. So asking questions is often always okay if you're being polite about it. So I would say that is a big myth, that a lot of people are overly scared of an offer disappearing. There are cases where candidates have so little leverage and are honestly working with there are some companies that do like exploding offers. There can be like some recruiters I've found that can essentially, I have seen offers be rescinded. But those are very crummy situations. So you kind of do have to evaluate your risk, but by and large, offers often get rescinded for totally different reasons than negotiation. That's usually not the problem. Well, there's another thing that you mentioned. You mentioned two things. Oh, someone saying, "Oh, is it is it okay to ask for a raise?" That's another one. People often don't ask for raises soon enough. As soon as you meet your manager, you for the first time, you want to be asking like, "How does it work here? What am I working towards? Am I working towards a raise?" Especially if you're at the lower side of your tier, your bracket, like your salary range. Maybe you're working towards a range, or are you working towards a promotion? Usually if you're getting above like the halfway point, you might be working towards like that jump up. And I think it's totally good for your manager to know that you're interested in how things work, how you can have a bigger impact, how you can grow. Getting a raise is such a big process. By the time you have a performance review happening, it's like too late. It's too, sometimes there's not much your manager can do, and they're like, "Oh, I didn't realize I wasn't working on this. I wasn't doing all the steps." So anyway, yeah, definitely ask these questions that usually people respond positively to knowing.
Nice. That's good to hear. Yeah. So I saw, just going back to your background a little bit, I saw that you went to MIT, right? And you did your bachelor's and your master's there, correct?
Yes, they have a 5th year Master's of Engineering in Computer Science, which I took advantage of, honestly, because I didn't have great grades for my first couple years at MIT. And I was very concerned about how I could work, whether I could work in industry, whether I could get a job. I'd been working throughout my time at MIT for professors and grad students, which was really fun. But I had like a little bit of a fear of industry, a little bit of I guess, amazement that maybe it was above my level. So I took a 5th year to get a master's, which actually taught me, wow, PhDs are very competitive. And I started realizing industry was, as soon as I went to a company, I was like, oh, it's like being on a team again. It's like doing engineering in a team. It was really fun. So yeah, that was an interesting jump, I will say, from being in a very like academic software design kind of background, and then coming into industry, which was very much like, let us make deadlines and get things out the door. It was very cool.
Did you learn about salary negotiation at MIT? Was that like a course they taught you, or did you learn from professors or other
No,
students, or just totally on your own
absolutely.
later?
Yeah, totally. I would say very far into my career, like in the last couple of years. So I graduated 2006, 2007. Honestly, I didn't even really understand how the internet worked back then. Like there was an upperclassman who was like, right when I was graduate or kind of halfway through my master's, and he was like, "Hey, you're trying to do this startup. You should check out Python. You should check out Linode and cloud servers and making websites." And I had to kind of figure out the those kinds of very specific construction tools, for making websites and things. So let alone how business works, how like being an employee, being a manager, like all of those kind of skills and knowledge that came just from having really great mentors along the way. Having managers who would pull aside the curtain and say, this is actually how we do performance reviews. And then, switching companies and hearing them say, well, actually, this is how we do it, or this is how we hire. And so kind of learning by doing. And then I do a lot of teaching and workshops and things like that. So then figuring out, or even just from my own reports, at first it was like, once I became a manager, just telling my own reports, okay, I want everyone to ask for raises, and like, this is how we're going to do it, so that I'm not, just responding to the squeaky wheel, which still happens. Even me knowing that, I want it to be an equitable situation, it's the squeaky wheel gets the attention. But yeah, just figuring out how can we share this knowledge back. And honestly, I would have to thank Adam Dangor, a friend of mine I was an interview engineer at Carrot. I still work at Carrot now, doing a lot of other things, but I started as an interview engineer. And with Adam, that's where in the last 2 or 3 years, that's honestly from him, I learned a lot about salary negotiation, because he has a lot more experience on that. Also self-taught through his own experiences and helping friends and family. And so we kind of then together, as we started coaching individuals, that's when we started to see what worked and what, how what worked in different situations. So sort of his knowledge more on the salary negotiation side, and my knowledge of like business processes and what, because I've done so much hiring, like I know how businesses think about the negotiation when a candidate is asking, so we kind of figured things out from there.
Nice.
This might change your assessment. Do you still think I'm an expert?
I do. Yes, I do actually. Yeah. I think a lot of people underestimate how much valuable information they have to share with others I rarely find people who overestimate their like wisdom / value to share.
Nice. What a nice community to be in.
So this show, my podcast, is specifically targeted to help like minority students or people from underrepresented backgrounds, untraditional backgrounds. So that could include someone who just is like a first generation college student.
Cool.
Do you find that people from those backgrounds tend to be less confident in asking for raises and or negotiating salary? And do you have any tips to like sort of counter that?
Yes, 100%. In fact, when I was doing a bunch of coaching, like primarily the people I worked with were underrepresented because, once you start to realize that you're underpaid, you want to start learning these skills that maybe you haven't been socialized to learn, or you haven't had that opportunity and haven't. So anyway, that's 100% a good. People who are underrepresented, especially in tech or just in business, and they sort of don't have that experience. The good news is that negotiation is a skill. Like anyone can learn it. People can do it. It often feels good even and builds the relationship. It's usually not very risky. So yeah, I think it's good to work on. I kind of just want to start giving you some tips. Should I go ahead and do that, or?
Yeah. Just a quick note before that.
Sure.
So one of the big things I've noticed that people don't seem to understand fully, and I think maybe because of embarrassment, they don't want to admit it, is when they're looking at an offer letter, they see base salary and they understand what that means. And then they see all these other terms and numbers and especially coming right out of college, like what is 401k matching? Why should I care? Or like, okay, they have this insurance policy. It seems interesting, and then move on. But those are pretty big things in your overall compensation. So as you're explaining, maybe if you also just want to go over some of the lesser known terms and what they mean and what you should be looking for.
Yeah. And you mentioned this earlier, like it would be so useful if our standard education, included financial literacy and like all these, understanding the things that we're going to encounter later in life, instead of like cosines. It's fine. Not bitter about all the continuous math we have to learn. Okay. So that's actually one thing I'll address first of all, which is let's just put all the chips on the table, which is that when you are early in your career, you have the least leverage. Like it's just a very challenging situation, and we can still face our challenges and find really nice jobs and careers. But to be ready for that, like some negotiation advice won't apply unless you have more leverage as a more senior or specialized engineer, for example. When your early career, some companies, they just have because they often hire so many entry level positions, they might have a very rigid structure. And so you may not have a lot of flexibility, but with negotiation, the goal isn't to get everything that you ask for. It's to feel like you don't have any regrets, that you fully explored the offer, that you understand all the components, and that you made the best decision of the available opportunities that you had. So that, it's like the start of a long-term relationship. You don't want to start that relationship feeling like confused or dismissed or something like that. So, so negotiation is still worthwhile, but it will be a challenge. It can be a challenge. That said, we don't know what we don't know. And many times I've heard recruiters say, oh, we don't make exceptions here. And guess what? Let me tell you, like 2 days later, they're like, oh, look, we made an exception. So if they're going to make an exception, why not you, right? Leave that door open. Okay. So in an offer, there's going to be base salary, and that's one of the big ones, because at the end of the day, The cash is like stuff that like that's like money that you get to spend however you want. So it can be really like usually base salary or any kind of sort of income is going to be. We often focus on that because it is so powerful. Because raises and promotions are often based on a percent of that. Other perks might be based on a percent of that. So pushing up the salary is generally a primary thing. There are other components like bonuses, like maybe a signing bonus or a year-end bonus, a relocation bonus for jobs that are not remote in the future, post-pandemic. There's of course like health insurance and things like that. Some companies even give life insurance, or the big tech, the FANG, Facebook, Apple, Google are known for these incredible perks, freezing your eggs and all sorts of things. There's 401k and retirement, which is something I definitely didn't learn in school and did not do that for a long time. And now I'm like, oh, that's something you should try to do if possible. Put money away for retirement, max out your 401k, all those things. Some companies give match. Here's the thing. There's two things about this. One, I just want to say that generally when you're applying for work, ideally you want to open as many doors as you can. And this is always going to be an iterative process. You're going to be sending out applications. And if you're not getting a lot of callbacks and interviews, okay, then that's what you're gonna have to work on, is how do you get noticed? How do you build that network? How can you get your foot in the door? If you're getting interviews, maybe, but not moving forward, you're gonna work on, okay, my interviewing skills. How can I make a better impression when I'm going through this process? And by the time you're getting offers, hopefully you have, ideally you have multiple offers, but there's always a sweet spot for everyone, trying to line everything up. So if you're working while a candidate, which can be very helpful but it means that you kind of have two full-time jobs, because being a candidate is also like a full-time job. So try to do what you can. I'm often trying to push people to like send more applications, do more interviews, but at the end of the day, everyone has a limit, and you want to still be shining, doing your best. The point is, what I'm trying to say here is, though, that once you get offers in tech, I will say there's a certain point where the offers you get are going to, like, tech is generally, if you're getting a full-time position, it's generally good. Like, especially if startups are a different story. Often startups don't have 401ks, or, they don't have a lot of things if they're quite small. But most big companies, you're going to get a benefits packet, and you're going to want to look to see if it works for you or not. But I will say in general, tech is very, very cozy, cushy, and especially early in your career where you don't have a lot of leverage. I mean, and first of all, no one's generally negotiating like health insurance or 401k. Like, those are company-wide policies. It's like, this either works for you or you have a different, better option elsewhere. You're often, some of the perks you're trying to make a holistic decision based on, or like health insurance, like maybe it doesn't work if you need a certain provider for, you have a certain life situation. You very seldom can like negotiate that, because that's like a company based, the company's negotiating with a provider. But so that's like, making a decision is maybe a different thing. What was I trying to say? I lost my train of thought. But when you're early career, look, I'm the first person to say, hey, maximize your money. Why not? Like, let's don't be ashamed to think money is important. If you don't think, like that's just often a way we socialize women and non-white people, right? Is to want, to make them want different things than like a privileged, than like a privileged, like, white male or something. But that said, when you're early in your career, one of the things you also want to look at is job opportunity and growth. And so balance that with your negotiation, because your career you want your career to go up. You're going to be earning and have so much more leverage and choice and pickiness, a few years down the line. So your first job is good, but it's also probably a stepping stone. So like, don't, to some extent, you do your best in the moment, but don't worry if you're like, oh, I'm not maximizing how much I could make, or this isn't the most prestigious role or whatever. Work somewhere where you can grow and have even more opportunities for that second and third job, because that'll be kind of tremendous. Now I feel like this is terrible. I should be giving negotiation tips. Let's go back to when you get an offer, when you negotiate. The important thing is, the reason why we talked about these different components: salary, bonus, stock options, 401k, all these different components, is that when you negotiate, the recruiter is going to try to tell you to evaluate the whole package. and like, like, oh, we're this is a lower salary, but we give you lunches every day, and there's sun chips and other chips. I once had a report who was really upset we only offered sun chips, and I was just like, dude, we're paying you so much, buy your own chips. Anyway, there might be companies that offer you Cheetos, and that's going to be amazing. But when you negotiate, you want to pick one thing at a time. And that's totally cool. You want to say, what's your most important thing? And you start there. Often it's salary. And so recruiters are trying to get you to evaluate the whole package, skip negotiation. They're trying to get you to think about making a decision. You're not making any decisions. This whole process, when you're interviewing anything, you're not making any decisions, even when you're negotiating. You're just trying to find out what's possible and explore your offers or your offer to get the best, to figure out what the opportunities are. Then you're going to make a decision at the very end.
So when a recruiter says, this is the most we can offer, we can't go any higher, how often is that actually true?
Oh, well, it really depends. If a recruiter is saying that, so here's the stages. What does a negotiation look like? Sorry, it's hard for me to answer that, but I can give you phrases that you can use in that situation. So the main thing you want to think about with a negotiation, they're really short, they're super stressful, but good news is they're really short. So you're going to open the negotiation, you're going to have a very short back and forth, and then there's like, what's your end game? And that what you kind of brought up is like, that's starting to get to the end game. So with the opening, the main thing with negotiation is you have to start it. So when someone gives you a number, usually you get an offer, and first of all, don't wait for everything in writing in tech. By the time you're getting all the paperwork, it's going to be harder to change. Paperwork takes work. Recruiter has to go talk to people, get things, if there's, stocks involved, like they've done a lot of work. And for you to then say, once you've got it all exactly in writing, to then say, you know what, I really want to make this big change. I want $10,000 more or something. You should ask, you should, if there's something really wrong, better late than never. But you're going to be more effective in tech. They want to have it as a verbal conversation before they do paperwork. And sure, you're going to then look at the writing, and if they've done something different than what you expected, you will talk, you can fix it. And some people are really worried about like getting like the company doing almost like lying to them or something. Like, yeah, if something looks bad in the paperwork, you'll get to it. But verbally, so often it'll be like a phone call, and often you won't even get a heads up. If you get an email heads up, that's nice. Often it'll be a phone call where they're just like, wow, we're so excited to offer you this position. Everyone loved talking with you. So like, how does 120,000 sound? When would you like to start? And they almost like forget that you might want to negotiate, and you're like, oh, I guess I could start, in 2 weeks. That is your best time to negotiate. And so you want to once you feel like you're getting through a process, you want to have in your head, what's your minimum? What are your walkaway numbers? Ideally for each category, for salary, for signing bonus, for stocks, for vacation days, for 401k. You want all your minimums and all your kind of what you would like to ask for. Like, what are your numbers that you would walk away from? That's your minimum. And what's the number that if they gave it to you, just be like, great, I feel great about this. I'm saying yes without disappointment. You might get offers where you say yes with disappointment. I was hoping to get more. And you might still say yes, because like jobs are still important. We all have life situations where we need to get paid. And that might be our best option. Hope that heater wasn't making a lot of noise on the call. So you have those numbers. And so when the recruiter when you get your offer, there's 3 options, right? It's either below your minimum, in the middle, like disappointing, but hey, let's negotiate it up, or above your like happy place. In all of those cases, you can still negotiate, even if it's above your happy place. That's really easy. You just say, maybe if you don't want to introduce too much risk, you just say, for all cases, you say something positive because you're trying to get them to be excited about moving forward. There's a myth that being cagey, we see on TV, like people who are cagey, like negotiate better, like don't give things away, don't tell them that you're into it. Throw that out the window for employment. Recruiters and hiring managers, they just want to know that you're excited to work there. So be positive, find some genuine, even if this is your backup company, you're just trying to get an offer so you can negotiate somewhere else. Like, just for all that, find whatever truth is in you. I really like chatting with everyone. Thank you so much for this offer. Be excited about that. And then even if their number is, say, above your happy place, you can always say, is this offer negotiable? And normally they'll say, sure. Like, what were you thinking? because they're not going to say, sure, you could get 10,000 more. And then you'd be like, great, thank you. They're not going to reveal the number. They're just going to say, well, what are you thinking? And then you have to say, oh, go ahead.
Sorry. If they say, no, we don't really negotiate.
Oh, if they say no, then you say, okay, thanks, and move on. If this is the low risk, like it's above your happy number. If you're trying not to introduce risk, then you just ask a question, is this negotiable? And if they say, no, we offer all of our entry level the same package, you say, great, thanks. Now I'd like to talk about a signing bonus, or now I'd like to talk about vacation days, whatever your number 2 thing is.
Okay, nice.
And usually salary is number 1. I mean, it might look weird. You could maybe put stocks if you're startups. Maybe you talk about stocks first, and then they say like, no, this is what we offer. And so, okay, now I'd like to talk about salary. So you move through the things you care about. Do it verbally. That's another thing is people, it's like scary. They're like, well, can't I write an email? I'll be more, I won't get flustered in email. Let me tell you, writing an email, it's so hard to work with someone for the recruiters, for whoever you're talking with. It's hard for a positive tone to come through an email. And if you're going to ask for 10 items on an email, they just think, wow, you're difficult, and then what they're going to then send a follow-up email. They're trying to, hash things out. Just have the 2-minute conversation. Just do it in person, but write down what you're going to say, practice with someone, maybe get some coaching, or even just practice with a friend. You can do it. You can do it, and it'll be far more effective. You can always go back to email afterwards. If you really can, if email is really the way you have to do it, fine. But it will be. I think it can be a lot less effective. So if they say, oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
No.
A lot of people my age, I don't think understand vesting and like stocks and what that like several year period actually means. And they just see the number like, oh, you get this much and yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And probably there are better resources to like explain all the intricacies of stocks. There's a couple things to know with stocks. So, or there's like, if the company's public, like when Google or Apple or Uber, all these big companies that are public offer stocks, that's money. Like you can, whether it's shares that you then, so often you'll get offered shares or options that you can then buy once they vest. So vesting just says, when do you get to buy them? Like they're like a promise. And once they vest, then you get to buy them. And then if it's a public stock, you can sell it on the market. And so you can essentially choose, basically don't buy them until they're worth something kind of thing. Like if you wanted to totally minimize risk, it's like, oh, I have an option to buy this share at a certain price that won't change. And as soon as they vest, I get to decide when to buy them. And as soon as I buy them, I can also there's some complicated rules about stock markets, but you can sort of sell them. So stocks with like the big companies, basically big companies that earn lots of money can give their employees lots of money through salary, perks, stocks, stuff like that. And companies that don't make lots of money won't. And that's where, negotiation is like a small needle compared to what companies you're going after. If you're going after,
this is something I actually didn't realize. You mentioned that you get to buy them at a guaranteed price. So when they list a number and like stocks, you get this much in stocks. Is that the value of the stocks that you get to buy at that current time, or is that the total? So how do you know what you actually have to pay for those stocks?
No. So they're telling you, they're going to say, we're going to give you 20,000 shares at $1 each. And so they're worth $20,000. And they might say, they often they'll say you won't get to first start buying them until like a year from now. Maybe it's like they're going to be spread across 4 years. Your cliff is a year from now, every month after that, or sometimes it's every year. You'll get a quarter a year basically, and you can't get them right away. It's like and sometimes bonuses, sign-on bonuses work that way, where if they're really big at these like big, like FANG, like at Amazon, you get like these huge bonuses. They might come, they might not come, they might come like every month rather than upfront in case you leave after 6 months and have to pay it back.
So you have to, sorry, just to.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, we can talk about stocks. Yeah.
So you have to pay them that number listed and then you get.
Oh, no. Oh yeah. Well, you don't pay. What happens is you get you're in a system. I was going to say you get a sheet of paper. I don't think there's paper anymore. But you're in a system where you have a prompt. It's like you whatever website you would normally use to go trade stocks, like what is it called? Like E-Trade, or there's different websites, right? Like you'll see that you have a certain amount of options or shares that you can like click a button to buy. So say you're given these 20,000 shares at $1 each. So it's worth $20,000, right? You're spread over 4 years or something. And once they start vesting, you can decide to pay, say you want to buy a share for 20 bucks. You can decide to buy it, then you own it, and then you can sell it. And the price might go up. Like that's usually the whole goal, is that you're given this $20 share, but say in a year when you want to buy it, it's actually worth $2. You're still going to buy it for 20 bucks. So you could sell it right away. If it's a public stock market, you could sell it right away and make back $1. So your 20,000 might turn into 40,000, right? Okay. And there's like I would like, oh man, there's for tax reasons, people often give advice about how long, whether you hold something for a year, there's like tax implications. At some point you might want to really look into this. But for terms of lowering your risk, which is like one important component to consider, is like the idea that if it's public, so the main thing with stocks is if these are public options you're being given, that's real money, because you can choose to buy and sell, assuming the price has gone up. There's also employee stock plans. There's like a few different perks that are basically trying to award you shares in the company with less risk, sometimes with a lower price than what you could sell them. So there's a lot of going to a public company that's making tons of money is usually a good move. You're going to get a great offer because they're like throwing money at you, at least in tech, right? Startups are a different story, because when they give you, hey, we're valued at such and such. So when we give you 20,000 shares out of however many shares, because we're valued at $20 million, blah, 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 these 20,000 shares are worth $1 each. But you can't sell them yet. You could buy, when they vest, you could buy them, but it's monopoly money until we go public or get bought by a public company, until our shares can be sold somewhere. And so that's like a different situation. And usually in those situations, the company is maybe a little bit strapped for cash. Startups will often try to give you less salary, right? We'll give you less market salary, but we'll give you more aggressive stock options that aren't worth any. It's a risk. You're taking greater risk, but maybe the rewards will be bigger because actually things are only worth like 50 cents. But if we go public, they'll be worth $7 or something. I don't know. I'm not a stocks expert, but one thing in startups that you can do is sometimes you can ask for two different. Sometimes they'll give you, or you can ask for, they'll do a little seesaw. They'll say, we'll give you more salary for less stocks, or less salary for a greater, a much greater amount of stocks. And they really, it's easier for them to award stocks. I would say especially for small companies, you start with salary because that's kind of a hard thing. That's a big commitment from a company. That's another reason to start there. It's a little bit harder for companies to commit to this yearly amount. If you don't get everything you want in a salary, say you're asking for more, and they say, you kind of mentioned this earlier, a recruiter says, well, we can't give you more on the salary. You're maxed out your band, or this is what we don't negotiate, whatever. Then you say, okay, that's fine. You're asking, say, for $10,000 more, and you say, well, what about a signing bonus? Can we make up the difference that way? It's a one-time commitment, especially for startups. It doesn't influence like them raising money so much in the future, right? Because it's like one and done. So signing bonuses can be a way to make up a difference that's easier for a company. Now it's only one. And if you're early in your career, maybe you're moving companies relatively quickly. So it's like, that could be fine anyway, right? Although it's cash. And so especially startups, they might not even want to do that. And so the third one I would move to is then maybe stocks or vacation or something. For stocks, definitely find more resources than myself. It's a super tricky concept. Funny story, so I worked at a startup that got, I don't know, maybe we don't have time for the story. We can move on if you want.
I don't know, it's okay.
Oh, it's great. This is maybe just a silly story, but one of the startups I worked for was acquired by Rackspace, which is really cool. And it granted us a ton of Rackspace stock, which is a public company at the time. And so that was quite nice. I worked there for 2 years, not really understanding that I had all these stocks. In fact, when I first, I kept getting these emails like, accept this thing, basically accept the grant. And when I finally did, I was like, oh, fine, I'll just accept it. And then I was like, oh no, what did I do? And I saw like this big money, like this big amount that was bigger than what was in my bank account. And I was like, oh no, do I owe them all this money? Like I was so confused. And I've never been so scared. Like it was the scariest moment in my life. I don't know if that's true, but it was so visceral. I remember it now. No, I didn't owe any money. You don't owe money until you buy. So anyway, trying to figure out stocks. It's a crazy world. Get some help by a definitely like a stocks and accountant expert for sure.
Yeah, I'll definitely do that. But I actually I realized that I actually need to do more research on stocks because I thought I sort of understood it, but I'm realizing now that maybe I don't fully understand how it works.
You know what? Here's the advice I got recently, also from my dad. My dad's 2 for 2 right now, I would say. He recently was like, understanding stocks, here's the thing about stocks. They're so complicated and the business is set up for the investors, and there's all these rules that go into play where it's just as likely that if you're at a startup and it has a nice big exit, that you still don't get anything. Like your stocks are in a different tier, they're not given preference. And so one question, if you really are trying to evaluate whether your stocks are worth something, first of all, when you're evaluating your offers, you might say, I'm going to work at this startup for the opportunity, not for the cash. Like these generally stocks are like worthless, right? Unless public company that you can sell. And even, hey, Rackspace went private at some point. Like at some point, its stocks went so far down, you stopped being able to sell them on the public market, and then they got bought. So stocks are always risky. But so the first thing you want to evaluate is if you are trying to think about what this financially means, these options, you have to first think, do I think this company is going to grow so tremendously, it's going to have a big exit? And is that exit going to be big enough that even matters to me? I worked at one startup that was maybe 80 engineers at the time, later bought by Oracle. I paid like $2,000 for my 1-year vested stocks that I got when I joined that I didn't negotiate. And I think when it got sold, it was maybe like 8,000. Like I got like a check for like $8,000 sort of thing. So that was a nice bump, but it wasn't like, it was a nice bonus, right? I mean, in terms of tech salary. I mean, at the time, this was quite nice. This was would have been 2006 or 2007 to 2008. So on a $80,000 salary back then, that was sort of the masters of engineering starting point for sort of Silicon Valley. All right. So is this company going to be successful is your first question, really? And then second, if you're trying to evaluate truly what does this mean? Should I buy these stocks? What you want to do is talk to the financial officer at the company and just straight up ask them how much would this startup have to be acquired for in order for me to get paid, in order for me to be able to sell my stocks at the whatever price, like they're offering it to you, like 76 cents or $2 or whatever the current valuation of the company is. Often every year startups get evaluated for tax reasons, basically, for everyone, so everyone can do taxes. And so say your stocks are worth $2. They say, hey, we're valued at, your stocks are worth $2 at this point. Ask the financial officer what the company would have to be acquired for you to be able to sell your shares at that price. Hopefully they then can take into account all of the special rules that are affecting everyone above you in the hierarchy. And then you can know, is this like a $20 million acquisition, a $20 billion? And then you can start to see like, well, how likely is that? If that makes sense. That's my very layman, probably overly simplified way of thinking about this.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, is that smaller companies, if they're not already on the market, you don't actually know that those will be worth anything. I did actually read a story once where someone was like, you get this amount of stocks and stuff, and it sounded like a really great number. And then they went on to like, the author of the article went on to detail how much that company would actually have to go like be sold for,
Exactly.
valued at.
Yeah.
And it was like, their logic was, with the number of stocks we're giving you, if within 2 or 3 years we're successful as Netflix, then these would be worth X amount. And it was like, obviously humorous, because it was like, well, why? I mean, maybe you'll be as successful as Netflix, but the chances of that are so incredibly slim. What makes you think that would actually happen? And are you willing to bet on that? Which most people would say no. And so I think it was a hypothetical situation. I don't think this actually happened, but the author was just making a point that like you really need to actually dig into more than just the numbers the recruiter is giving you. So one other thing I wanted to bring up really quickly, because we are running a little bit out of time, is a lot of these positions are salary. So that's on the assumption that you're working about 40 hours a week, but obviously you may be required to work more and you're not going to get paid extra for it normally. I think there are some cases built in where if you work overtime, they sometimes compensate you extra. But so I've noticed that your team can really matter, because if your team is constantly working 60 hours a week, that's something you want to be aware of, I think, before you're signing a salary that sounds reasonable, but then when you divide it by your estimated time in the office, maybe it's actually sort of low. Do you ever like recommend that candidates ask to sort of meet the team they'll be on during salary negotiation, or just in the offer process?
Yeah, oh man, we are so disempowered as candidates and as employees. So a lot of this is very, again, kind of specific to someone's situation. Like some of these details, like if you only have one offer and you need, you're trying to make rent by the end of the month or whatever, it's like, you don't have the luxury to ask some of these questions. If you have 3 offers, then you are trying to like weigh different options, including like, how nice is it going to be to work here? Here's what I would say is until you get an offer, you are always being interviewed. Like, even the questions you ask, like at the end of an interview or to your recruiters, you are still being evaluated for the questions you ask. So do ask questions 100%, but when you're being interviewed, that's not the same. That's not the right time to start trying to really dig into like work-life balance. Like as far as they know, you are you have a healthy work relationship, but you are motivated and ambitious and, very conscientious about getting your work done. Once you have an offer, and you are negotiating, that is definitely a fine time to start asking questions. That's a great time.
Hi guys, I'm just going to quickly add, sorry the video cut out. I lost my Wi-Fi due to a winter storm that we are in the middle of. So we didn't get to quite finish the episode, but I think there was still a lot of valuable content that was shared, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. Well, that's it for today. I hope you all enjoyed the episode. As always, please let me know what you thought and any specific questions you'd like me to answer. If you enjoyed the show, please help me out by telling your friends and sharing this episode with others and on your social media accounts. The more people who hear it, the more people I'm able to help. And if you want to support me financially, you can do so by visiting my website, www.breakingintosoftware.com, and clicking on the support tab. You can also find more content on our website, LinkedIn, Twitter, Snapchat, YouTube, Reddit, and Facebook, all under the name Breaking Into Software. All these links and the ones to find our guests are listed in the show notes of the episodes. Thanks for listening.